Okay, I think that's enough.
I think so too. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the new Future Fabric webinar series. Today we are going to cover Ableton Live 11. Accordingly, we've got a very special guest, Ableton certified trainer Mark Burnett. You're actually the only certified Ableton trainer in Leipzig, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
nice.
There's a few in East Germany in general, but in Leipzig, I'm the one.
The one and
The
only.
one. Yeah.
lucky us, we've got you on board.
No, thanks for inviting me. Really, really cool and interesting little start there. With the
So maybe tell us a little bit more about you.
yeah, so certified trainer. I've been here in Leipzig for about 3.5 years now, working with Ableton software for something like 15 years, since about version 4, I think it was. And yeah, working right across the spectrum, really, helping artists, working with groups, performing myself, obviously producing as well, and just generally having loads of fun with it. It's just a really fun piece of software, and it's really fun to work with other people with it, and that's kind of been the theme for me, really, and my experience working with live. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've seen you playing a little bit for us.
Yeah.
Maybe show us a little bit of your setup here and what's actually happening, because it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's move around here. I've actually, at the moment, everything looks like it's still playing. Because I used kind of like a tape stop effect, which I can, which is, you know, just like actually pretty cool. I mean, it doesn't sound exactly like vinyl, but it's pretty good. So yeah, I mean, this is anyone who watched from the very start. This is kind of how I work when I'm producing my own material. I've got a template. It looks pretty complicated here, but it's a template that I've built over time, using the controllers that I have here and the Ableton devices to enable me to just come in the studio, turn the machines on, and then kind of play, and using a lot of Ableton's kind of built-in features to facilitate that, you know, so I don't really have to think about, okay, I'm making a project, it's going to be what BPM, I'm working in what key, la-di-da, all of these things that you have to kind of pair before you can even get to the business of making music. That those obstacles are kind of out of the way now, and I can literally just choose from the various software instruments, or in this case, what we've been listening to is entirely external instruments being triggered from live, and the sounds are coming from the various synths in drum machines in the studio. But it could equally be just VSTs or drum racks and stuff like that. So that's basically what's going on. I'm just programming MIDI, playing with some of the really basic editing tools, and then having an environment up here with the VCMs. So I use 2 of these VCM 600s, these amazing Vestax machines, and it gives me like a really kind of like DJ friendly. I mean, you're a DJ, right? So when you look at this controller setup here,
makes sense.
It looks familiar, right? And for many years I played with lots of different ways of interacting with live, and you always had to kind of bend the way, you know, because I started with DJing as well. I always had to kind of bend the way a little bit as to how to kind of what felt natural in terms of where control should be. And the thing, not just with DJing, obviously with audio engineering in general, when you look at a mixer, it sort of looks like this. Your channels look the same. So it kind of, it's intuitive in that sense, and that for me is really liberating, because it means I can very quickly do things without really having to think too much about it. But this setup did evolve over quite a long time. And I don't want to dive too deeply into what's going on here, but just to give people an idea, there's a lot going on these tracks. There's a lot of custom stuff. There's device racks that I've built. There's macros that I've constructed. There's, of course, instances of all the external hardware on the different tracks. Some of them have got other tools on, like the Juno's got a gate on it because it's a little bit noisy. So you see if I turn that off, you hear the noise.
Oh, yeah.
So simple stuff like that. The Yamaha's really clean, so it doesn't need a gate. But there's actually, what you're looking at here, obviously before we started the webinar today, I was showing you a few things. So we've put some other devices in here that wouldn't normally be in the template, but part of the beauty of live and the way that it keeps evolving is that the tools that come to live, and I think 11 as a version is really exemplary of that, is the tools aren't just another level of surface level, kind of surface level tools, like really obvious stuff. They really kind of aim to fill gaps and to enhance. So there's this whole thing about just another distortion and another like classical kind of effect. But I think Live 11 has introduced so many just really mind-bending tools that are actually quite difficult to get your head around. But that's kind of the level that Live is at. It needed those extra tools, that extra level of professionalism in some of the things like working in arrangement, and also with the whole production process and the live process, kind of really needed, in some sense, that extra level of depth that you could go into. So there's quite a few sort of the new effects in here that, like I say, we were playing around with, but all of the tracks have one of these racks on that I constructed, and these are basically all the effects that I would typically want to have on each channel. So I created a group and a rack so that it's really easy to just copy and paste those, and the macros enable me to very quickly then map those parameters to the controls on the VCM. So if you have a look here, it's quite a good example. So we're on the Yamaha channel here. Obviously I've got the volume control, that's paramount, but here I've got a low pass filter, probably where it should be. It's even labeled frequency. And then I've got a resonance control. But I've also at the top here got a high pass filter, and you can see how the resonance is linked, because I don't really need, I've decided over time what controls I really need to have as like specifically one thing, and what controls I can kind of have as a multiple or a multitude of different parameters. So resonance, whether I'm working with a high or low pass filter, the resonance, I can kind of work with that. And you'll notice things like the device here turning itself on and off when I get to maximum value. And that's another thing that you can do with macros that's really cool. So you can actually completely deactivate a device and have a parameter change linked to one control. Again, it just really simplifies the workflow. And I kind of modeled these channels on the Model 1 mixer. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's...
no, not really.
It's, I think it was developed alongside or with Richie Horton, well, I'll probably shoot me down for getting it wrong, but I believe it's Alan and Heath guys, or probably completely wrong there. But it's a mixer that has a slightly different approach to the channel strip. So rather than having this kind of conventional high, mid and low, which is pretty standard, they use a high and low pass filter, exactly like this, and a single band parametric. So in the middle here, I've got a single band parametric EQ, so I can pick out frequencies or kill specific frequencies within a mix, which actually transpires to be a lot more useful than these kind of broad frequency zones. Most of the time when you're DJing and mixing, you just want these filters.
Yeah,
you know,
obviously.
Because you're not trying to mix a track in a studio, you just want to get things out of the way and push them into areas. So this works really well. And then on top of that, every track has a beat repeat on it, which is arguably my favorite device because it just does the most amazing thing. So let me just turn this other stuff down and play. So we've got this, this simple part that's playing, and the beat repeat I can turn on or off. And then still apply the effects over the top. I can change the length. And this feature alone for me is it just opens the door to every track suddenly from whatever content, whether it's the clip itself or whether I'm just, hang on, any trigger, and I can loop it straight away. I can loop it straight away and start playing around with that. And it like adds an extra layer to everything that you're doing.
Yeah, awesome.
And then also on there, just to finish with this channel strip thing, because this is basically the essence of it, is it's getting all the controls I need. So I obviously have a high, mid and low kill, which is useful, more so than the high, mid, low EQ. And then I also have this TAL filter plugin, which is on every track. And it's essentially, oh look, it's decided to reset itself, but it's essentially a volume envelope. And what it's doing is what you would kind of try to achieve with sidechain compression on a kick. It's just turning the volume right down at the beginning of every hit. So if I play this again, turn it on. Or not. For whatever reason, it's decided to not illustrate that it's rolling, but basically it's just doing that thing of ducking.
Yeah.
And I can turn that on or off per channel so that I have the option of very quickly achieving that effect without having to have some complicated sidechain setup.
The filter's free, right?
The TL filter is a free plugin, yes. I try in my webinars and demos, unless it's specifically a theme, to stay away from stuff that isn't either free or built in some way to live. Because in reality, pretty much everything you need to make almost any kind of music that has some kind of not 100% organic nature to it is possible. With the tools that you've got. You have to be quite good at them, you know, like with any tool, you have to know how to use it in order to get the results, but it's insane, really. And it is kind of one of the themes about Live 11, because there's not a huge amount of new stuff. Like I say, this top-level stuff, there's no new instruments in the instrument folder, for example. And in the effects section, there's actually only 3 new ones, the spectral resonator, the spectral time, and the hybrid reverb. But because Max for Live is now basically fused with Ableton, at least with Suite, and the fact that you have also the packs, so the sound libraries that you can buy directly from, or quite often for free, but also purchase from Ableton and other places, are just absolute treasure troves of all kinds of amazing instruments that are a composite of existing instruments and effects that are again composites, as well as lots of exciting new stuff, which I guess we'll come to at some point in the webinar, right? Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe just get rid of it. The master bus. Your master bus looks pretty complicated. Maybe you should just so we are not confusing anybody.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, in essence, it looks like a lot of the things in here, they're devices that I've built. They're built from simple components, but collectively they're a little bit more complicated. This MonCon thing is basically just, it's me saving money on buying a monitor switch. So because I've got enough outputs on my sound card, I can use more than one set of monitors, and I can assign them to different outputs. And because we have this amazing external audio effect device that enables us to send audio to an external, we can put this in a chain, and I can send audio to different destinations. So here, one set is being sent to the Genelecs in here, the other set to the Tannoys, and then I've even got a set here set up to send the audio back for the webinar. You know, that's all very possible. And using that in combination with Ableton's key mapping, I can then use my keyboard here to very quickly switch between the 2 monitors, to dip the signal all together, or to mono it. And those functions, rather than spending money on an extra box, are pretty amazingly useful. There are a few drawbacks to make sure that when you update that the mappings are correct. That's basically just for monitoring. So aside from that, there's a utility that I've got on here just to tidy, basically because these functions are almost always necessary. Yeah. The limiter is there just to stop me from accidentally driving the main above 0, especially when I'm just jamming stuff or playing live. And then we've got another rack here, which looks like the racks on the channels, but it is a bit different. It's got a bunch of effects buried in here, some of which are from other people and some of which I've built myself, with fairly extensive signal paths, all kinds of crazy effects. But when it's reduced down, it just gives me access to, on the VCM again, it gives me access to some kind of master effects like you would have on a Pioneer mixer or an Allen Heath. So you've got a few master effects that I can just add to anything. So which we had before. And the whole point of that is that when I want to start creating music, I actually very quickly want to get to, well, what does that sound like when I start doing some kind of mixing on it? And my workflow is very much just writing music in flow and trying to keep that going. And I'm sure if you've ever tried that, it can quite quickly, having these DJ controls immediately at hand means that I can immediately start actually playing with the ideas, and individual tracks start becoming like individual songs in a mix.
Yeah.
And that process for me, I think, is what makes it so much fun, and also is the reason why I can kind of output a lot of different stuff in a very short period of time, because I've just got that familiarity. Yeah.
So Ableton Live 11, the new update recently launched. I've seen a few videos, and one of the first things I've noticed was the probability function.
Yeah, right, okay.
So can we maybe talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, that is really super cool. We can probably use this track that I've been working on here as a bit of an example. So we've got here, if I open this up, so we're looking at drum. Okay, I mean, as it stands, it's pretty bare bones. Okay, if I open this clip up, what we can see is that there's a few notes in here. We've actually looped this end section. So I've been using the Ableton's capture feature a lot, which is listening all the time to what you're playing, and then when you choose to, you can kind of re-loop what you've been playing. But I'm going to crop this down now so it's a bit easier to see. Okay, now because it's fairly bare bones, there's not a lot, not easy to demonstrate. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to draw in some hi-hats across.
Yeah.
So we've got some 16-beat hi-hats. Now, on its own, this is going to sound fairly static, which is okay, you know, it's a sound. But if you wanted to kind of inject a little bit of like human error, I guess, if you call it, or just a bit of movement and flow into that, you've now got more options than just velocity. We always classically add velocity, the ability to choose, you know, at what level that particular note will play. And we can still do that. I can select all of these hi-hats here and turn the velocity down. One thing though, with these hi-hats, because it's coming from the TR505 here, it's only got 5 velocity levels. Okay. So there's not, you wouldn't hear like a really subtle differences. We'll have to make bigger steps to hear them, but you will hear a difference. So that's kind of the lowest level, I think. Yeah. So we can change the velocity like that. But what we can do now with velocity is we can actually randomize it. So up here, you can see we've got this randomization function, and it's also got a range. So that's obviously 127 is the full range. Mm-hmm. If I hit randomize now, you'll see that these velocities have been randomized across the entire range. And I'll play it back so we can hear. And I think because the 505 only has these 5 velocity levels, that's worked reasonably well, because it's not really turning it to lots of different velocities. It feels a bit more constant. But that's quite nice, right? So that's already given it a bit of movement. Okay. But the next thing is, of course, that we've now got the ability to change the probability of a note playing. So if I choose all of these hi-hats again, and select the chance here and dial it down, it's obviously going to, according to the percentage, either play that note or not. So if I stick it down at around 50%, you know, it's picking some notes and others not. Yeah. And you'll also notice it's different every time it goes round, because it's a probability thing. And again, you can randomize it, so I'll give it some randomization. Which is again interesting, because it means that some notes are really likely to play, whereas others aren't. And you can then move from there to kind of influencing the way that it works, you know, by choosing individual notes that you think you definitely want to be more often, and some notes that maybe you think you want to be ghost notes. So for example, these 3 toms here would be a good example. If I bring the probability of that down a little, then we will get some interesting variations on that fill. Let me bring these probabilities all up a bit, and then just collectively a little bit more in control. So we only got 2 toms that time, and a different 2 toms that time, and then sometimes we'll get all 3. And that's, again, just in terms of turning basic stuff into things that have a bit more movement and a bit more dynamic, it's really super cool. And it's also, of course, applicable to anything that uses MIDI, so we can also do that with melodies and other patterns. I mean, we could go over to the Yamaha here. What have we got going through here? We've got this this pattern. Let's play this pattern again and see. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to select the whole thing and divide it by 2. Okay. And then what I can do at the bottom here is, let's just, you know, fresh it up a little bit, choose the velocity, maybe not quite so broad, randomize it. Okay. We have got another feature. You notice we have now these sticks, these little lollipops, rather than just the dots. And that's to enable us to hold the command button or the control and to drag a range. And that basically constrains a range for the velocity. So it can be randomly anywhere within that range, which again adds another layer of kind of randomization or the humanization to the... Okay. But then we get to the probability and we can dial all this stuff down and we're going to get variations on that pattern. Again, straight away kind of getting maybe some inspiring ideas, maybe actually finding something that really works consistently, but having this little element of probability playing in there.
So first of all, what I'm seeing here is the scale function.
Yes, of course.
So
I mean,
what about it?
It is actually on, yeah. Well noted. I mean, we were playing around with it before, but this is again another great addition to Live 11. For people who've been using push, they're probably familiar with it, and actually other controllers also kind of have this locking to scale feature. But what we can do now inside the MIDI roll, which again is pretty cool for people who are familiar with the workflow but don't have one of those controllers, is we can reduce what's visible in the piano roll to just what's in the scale. So at the moment we're working in G minor. If I turn the scale off here, you can see how those notes are in reality are distributed across the keys there. We can of course still use the old fold mode, which just reduces it to the notes that have been played. But the scale, the addition of the scale here means that we can then also see actually if those notes are in a scale. And when we fold it to a scale, we can then very easily draw notes in that we're pretty confident are going to work in that context of that key. Again, yeah, a really useful tool if you're not too savvy with working with scales and keys. But it does, of course, come at a bit of a cost because when you've done that, when you're locked into this mode, you kind of remove the possibility of playing with notes outside of a key. And a lot of really interesting stuff is outside the key, the accidental notes and the happy accidents as well, you know. So it's a great tool, but it's one of those that you kind of have to be wary not to use as a bit of a crutch. It's very much like that with the push. It's very difficult not to play the push in scale mode because it just works so well. But I find the balance of using that and actually playing on a keyboard, because I have both available, kind of works for me. If I just want to mess around and not be constrained, I'll usually just play on the keyboard. But yes, it's a really amazing feature, definitely.
So the first thing coming to my mind with the probability thing, how do we capture it in 11? Right,
yes. Well, that's interesting actually, because there's another new feature of Live 11 that we have is comping. So obviously what we want to do here is we just want to record this output. So we can record this probability influenced MIDI output into another channel. We could also record the audio, this sort of random audio, to another channel. And let's actually do that. So I've actually got 2 tracks already set up here. Well, one from the Yamaha that's going to collect the audio, but I'm going to set up an extra. I'm going to set up an extra MIDI channel at the end here, and that's going to capture the MIDI from the Yamaha. So that from that channel anyway. So that means that whatever's being spat out of this probability and velocity will be captured in here. But instead of doing it in here, what we'll do is we'll go over to the arrangement view. This may be a little bit confusing, but we've got here the audio from. Actually, we were doing this before, weren't we? So we've already made quite a mess here. So let me hide these take lanes. So it's all about take lanes. I'm going to basically show you comping, which is for people who've been using it in other DAWs. It's very clear what it is. It's the ability to basically record several takes over the same phrase, and then to be able to cut the best bits of those takes into your finished piece, which I think most people get the concept of, and it's been covered loads. But I think one of the most interesting things about comping is the kind of the sound design and compositional potential of that. So if I go to the MIDI channel we've got here and record enable that, and then if I can just go back and check from the Yamaha point of view, so that's track 8. So this is exactly where we did it before. Let me delete that stuff and then enable record on that track. We'll go back to the start and hit record. Okay, so I'll stop it there, and then I'm going to loop this section. So that was kind of like a first take. So you can see here, I only need to unmute this or bring it to arrangement. You can see this is the audio we've just recorded, yes. And down here we've got the MIDI, and you can see that it's not consistent. It's recorded that variation. So we've now got that as a fixed entity. So if you want this, this repeatability, if you found a section that's good, that's how you would do it. But what we can also do, if we take that the next step, I'll record a shorter section so that we're not here forever. But if I just hit record again, so you can see it's recording over what was previously there. Yeah. And old behavior was just to do that, was to record over. But what's actually happening now, I'll let it finish one more loop. Okay, what it's actually doing is saving those recordings as separate takes. So what you can do is you can right-click in the title bar of the track and show the take lanes. And there's quite a few here, because like I say, we have already been playing around with it, right? Yeah. So here we've got all the various lanes. These are the different takes. Now, with this instrument, or this particular part, it was all very similar anyway, right? So we're just kind of recording variations of the same thing. But we can listen back to these. Theoretically. Well, it's turned down here, track 8. Track 9. Okay, yeah. We turn the loop on. Or we can listen to the individual takes. I mean, as I said, they'll sound very similar. I know we've got some drums in there. What did we do? We recorded in the wrong track. But anyway, I'll show you in the MIDI track here. It's the same situation. So we go to show the take lanes, and here are the various take lanes. So we've got a number of different runs of that particular MIDI piece. Now we won't hear anything because it's just MIDI. So I'm going to just maybe put a grand piano on. Something not too hefty. Hey, where's the old grand piano?
By the way, while he's searching for the piano, you can ask questions if you've got any. So let us know.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll do some questions relatively soon, hey? And then some more at the end. So if I put a grand piano on here, we'll hear. And I can preview the different takes, which again, as I say, are sounding pretty similar.
Yeah.
But if, say, I like this particular piece here of this take, I just select it, press enter, oops, not delete, hit enter, and it jumps that selection up into the top row here. So in this way, we can select areas of the different takes that we like, and we can create a composite, a comping at the top. And then we can fold the lanes down again, and we've got our kind of finished assembly. And again, in this example, we don't hear a lot of change, but actually if we hop back up to this stuff that we were doing before, hey, because we've sort of recorded over some of this, but if we go to here, for example, and unmute that. So again, I demonstrated this with, like I say earlier, by loading a bunch of drum loops in, right?
Yeah.
So I put 5, 6 different drum loops in these different take lanes, and then used the process of going through. Let's highlight this section, just going through and choosing various elements of the other takes and punching them up to the top row here, and we get which is nice, right?
Yeah.
And
definitely.
I would have typically done this before Live 11. I would have done this just by cutting loops up in arrangement and making this kind of mashup, and then and consolidating it. It takes a bit of time. It's because you have to line everything up in terms of the phase and stuff, so that the timing makes sense. And this is just a super quick way to do it. And you can do really cool stuff with vocal takes. It doesn't have to be just used for fixing the perfect take. It can be used for basically cut and shut with bass lines, synth lines, music effects, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it is a very useful tool. But it is, of course, only something that you can only do in the arrangement.
No, okay.
Because that's kind of where the heritage of comping comes from, is doing this multiple take thing.
But this whole concept kind of reminds me on the follow action. So there was a new feature too, I guess.
That's right. Yeah. There's follow actions. You're right. Actually, this kind of behavior, or getting this kind of chopping thing, can be done with follow actions, and that's exactly the tool that you would use in session view in order to achieve a similar thing. And it's a very good point, because follow actions have been hugely upgraded for Live 11. We talked about this earlier, didn't we? And we loaded up a few drum patterns up here and added some follow actions to them. So what we've got here, if you have a look, is basically a bunch of different drum loops. I'm going to move these ones back up. Let me deactivate the follow action. So you can see here that these different clips, if I click on them, have different drum loops in. And let's see if they play nicely. Yeah, so we've got this thing, we've got some loops, we could chop them together. And by using follow actions, we can do very similar stuff. So if I select all of these clips here, I can go down into the clip view at the bottom and turn follow actions on. And the main thing that's happened here is that it's been tidied up, and some of the kind of core functionality has been made a little bit more intuitive. At the moment, you see these asterisks, and that's because I've selected a number of clips that have different settings for that parameter. So if you see that, it just means that your selection contains clips with different settings here. But I'm actually going to select here, well, there's a bunch of different options. The newest thing is jump, and that's really useful in some cases, which I'll come to in a bit. But I'm just going to use, for this case, other. And what that means is, at the end of the specified time or the end of the loop, any other clip will play. Mm-hmm. And that's any other clip that's in this little constellation here, right? So I'm going to select other. I'm going to select linked. So linked is kind of the new function. It basically means that the follow action is linked to the length of the clip. So the multiply here dictates how many multiples of the clip length that follow action exists or triggers on. So if everything is on one length of the clip. So if I play the first clip, it will play that clip through, and then it will play another one. Yeah, which is kind of cool. But what I love to do with this is obviously to start playing around with the different multiples. So linked is cool. It's kind of really useful when you're arranging some kind of a performance. But if you go to unlinked, you can like really shorten this up. You'll also notice that actually legato mode is enabled, and I'll just show you what the difference is. So if I turn legato mode off and set the unlinked time to like a beat, then this happens. So at every beat, it's triggering another clip, but it's starting from the beginning. If I enable legato, what it does, it just keeps position in relation to the bar. So when it jumps to the next clip, if it's on 2, it jumps to 2 on the next clip. So it kind of keeps this position contiguous, right? So now when I play, it will sound a bit more like a drum loop should, because there'll be this kind of flow to the loop. And you'll see that every time it jumps to the clip, it jumps to whichever point that the clock is at.
Yeah.
And then we can go crazy with this by just adjusting or like really shortening the time here. I've only selected one clip. Let me select all of them and bring this down to 1. So we get really glitchy. Dial it back a bit. And of course, you know, that's giving me a very similar effect to what we had. At the moment, we're setting the same parameters for every clip, but each clip can have a completely different set of parameters.
It's pretty cool, actually. Kind of reminds me on the sampling of the MPC, where you randomly hit any button you've got and just write with the outcome.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Should we see if we've got some questions?
Yeah, actually, we've got a few. For example, someone wants to know what's about Ableton and hardware. How do you connect them? How do they work in general? Is it easy to set it up?
Okay. Well, I'm not going to say it's like super easy, because there is a basic level of understanding of kind of audio technology that you need to have, that I think a lot of people assume. And it is actually quite often the thing that people ask me. It's like, yeah, you've showed me all this, how to set it up in the software, but where do I plug this in?
Yeah.
You know, and I've done all the things you showed me, but I still don't get any sound, and they haven't got audio plugged into the sound card. So, I mean, all of the stuff we did here in this little example so far is sounds from external gear. So hardware is a big thing. And it's really quite straightforward to implement. You need to understand how your sound card works. I'm not going to teach people that in this webinar, but providing that you've got a way of getting audio and MIDI information in and out of Ableton, in and out of your machine, which requires a sound card or a MIDI interface or a composite, then you can get sound in and you can get sound out. And through that means you can then communicate with and receive audio from external devices. So, for example, with the peak here, because that's like right in front of me, on the track here, the only thing here that's essential is this external instrument device. And what that's doing is it's sending MIDI information. So from live here, let me hop over and turn it up a bit. Oh, it's filtered up. Okay, here we go. So it's taking this MIDI, and obviously the push here is connected via USB. That's all this needs, because it's a controller, so that's connected via USB, and that's sending MIDI via USB to Ableton. So Ableton's getting this MIDI information. You can see the tiny little MIDI indicator here. Shows me where the MIDI's coming in. And then that MIDI goes into this device, which sends it according to how you've got it connected. Now with the peak here, it has USB MIDI as well.
Yeah.
So this device is actually, again, USB connected, and that's how the MIDI information is then getting to the peak. In a lot of cases, like with older machines, or not even older machines, but you know, this MIDI is how it's typically been done for a very long time now. It still works amazingly well, but this is one of these kind of fat 5-pin DIN connectors that transmits MIDI information. And MIDI information isn't audio, it's actually just notes. So it's just C2. It also transmits information like how hard you press it and whether there's a pitch bend. And it's just basic stuff. But that would otherwise be connected. So the TR-505 and the Juno here and the VCM and the V50, they're all receiving MIDI via these cables. But this is being sent via the USB to the peak. And then the audio is coming back out of the peak and going into some of the inputs on my sound card. And I can see here I can then select here where that audio is going to come back from. And you can see it highlighted here. And of course, I've labeled these channels. So actually, if I open up the preferences, you'll see in your audio settings, you can label your inputs here so that you can tell what you're connecting stuff to. And you can also label your outputs so you can see where you're sending audio to. And once you've done that, then it becomes fairly self-explanatory when you're using an external device here, because you can choose. And if I open up here, you'll see I've actually got a lot of destinations that I can send MIDI to, because a lot of these devices are MIDI compliant. And the Microlight here, which is just a MIDI card, has 5 independent outputs. So there's a whole lot of channels and a whole lot of options here. But it's as simple as sending that out and getting the audio back in. And then this track acts like that device in kind of the same way that you would expect a VST to work. If you just dropped Diva or Serum or something onto a track, you'd expect to play notes and get sound. It's the same process. It's just the sound generation is happening inside a machine, outside your computer. It does get more complicated with some stuff. So if you've got things like octa tracks and like complicated sequencing and sound creation devices that have a lot of their own MIDI functions, then this behavior becomes less relevant. It can still be done, but people who use those kind of devices tend to actually do the sequencing, so this MIDI stuff, on the device itself, and just send what's called a clock signal to that device. So you get that device in sync, and then you play the patterns from that device, but it's in time with the machine.
So maybe back to Ableton Live 11. So when I installed 11.10 Ableton 10, we've got a lot of new effects. Like, for example, the drum bass, which changed the way I'm working by a lot. Did we get any super important new feature or some super interesting effect?
Yes, well, yes and no, or jein, as they say in Germany. I mean, this was kind of where I opened with this thing that there's not a lot of like top level, really obvious, hey, we've got an amazing new synth, we've got an amazing new drum machine. It's kind of stuff that you can add on to those existing tools that just make them a whole lot more expansive and open up more options, which isn't always a great thing, but like, the obvious hits are, there are some new audio effects, okay? So the 3 that have been fairly well covered in all the other tutorials and webinars, the spectral time, the spectral resonator, and the hybrid reverb, they are new, and they're really good. They're wild. I mean, you can do the most crazy stuff with these devices, but I don't feel like going into detail on those is really that important, not because they're not great, but because that content's already been fairly heavily covered. And with those devices, I think you really kind of just have to get in there and play around with them. It's not like a filter where you can sort of quite easily explain sonically what's going on. They're doing quite complicated things. And with stuff like that, I think unless you really have the mind to understand how those algorithms are working, how the parameters are really changing things, your best bet is just to get amongst it and try out some of the presets and start tweaking knobs and see what comes out and sort of build a familiarity in that way. And again, no disrespect whatsoever intended for these effects. They are amazing, but the hidden gems, if you like, for me, are the things that have appeared in the packs that come with Live. So there's a bunch of new sound packs and tools. I mean, here's one that's popped up I'd almost forgotten about, but Pitch Loop 9 is a new device which does some incredible pitching and looping. So like really, really cool stuff. I mean, I could dive into that, but I had actually forgotten about that. I was more aiming towards, I've obviously tagged some of this as new. It's actually a really cool thing about Live, well, since Live 10 is these collections, being able to tag stuff with number keys so you can easily find things. And this, one of the uses I have for that is to have a tab here that's called new, because I'm quite often getting new sounds and samples and things, and I put them in the library when I'm not working on anything, and then I'll come back and I'll have completely forgotten about them. I mean, I'll go in the library and start surfing through and be like, wow, what's all this stuff? But if there's something really new that I've put in or that really needs investigating, I just give it that tab and then I can go here and see, oh, right, this is all the really new stuff. But I kind of wanted to get to this Inspired by Nature pack, this Dylan Baston. It's really blown my mind in so many ways. There's an audio effect in here, which is kind of a hidden gem. This one's called vector delay. Let's go back to this. I think this Yamaha's the easiest to listen to sound we've got, or maybe the Peak. Let's see. Let's try this one. Okay. Now we've played around with the probability, so let's just. And then I think what we also did was okay, so a bit easier to listen to, and we kind of already being able to tell what's going on in the first place obviously helps when you're listening to a wild effect. Let me just shrink this other stuff down a little bit. So this vector delay, again, just drag it in raw, but it also comes with a whole bunch of presets. And it sort of gave me the impression that it was a bit like a kind of Doppler effect, where it kind of stretches and pulls the audio. But it's sort of, it gives that illusion, but it's kind of more of a delay thing. I mean, it is a delay, but the way it works is again, like really organic and kind of quite unpredictable in many ways, which is kind of the theme for the Inspired by Nature. It's like everything's got a pattern, but it's not, nothing's the same, you know, everything's got its own fingerprint. I'm just going to drag in a few presets just to sort of give you an idea. I put the mix on 100% so we can hear just what that's doing. Let's try this one. Really interesting delay features. And we can speed it up. We've got some kind of top level controls here, and this vector field here sort of has various functions, but you can see this one little voice here, this delay node, if you like, that's kind of zipping around. You can constrain it a bit using these range functions here. I can turn the voices up, and then you see we've got a blue one, and these are they're kind of intended, I think, to be like positive and negative. They've kind of got a relationship with each other. I still haven't quite worked out exactly how that behavior is fully influenced, but we could choose 3. And then it looks fairly straightforward, and then you open it up. And it's one of those, you're like, huh? Flow field, attractor, emitter? Like, these are like new words. Yeah. I mean, they're not new words, but for an effect, that's like, you kind of get an idea, maybe, you know. So if I go emitter here now, you can see how it's like, actually it's creating these dots rather than just allowing the existing ones to sort of play out. And then you've got a whole bunch of rate controls, so how often these things happen and in what intensity, randomizations, fading, shape of the fade. And then this whole charge thing, like the balance between the positives and the negatives, which again, I haven't quite worked out how those relationships express themselves fully, but just really wild stuff, hey? And then when we get into these other parameters, and we can reverse it, just like that. There's a filter in here, pan effects, some standard sort of, again, filter and time controls, and then another kind of scale function in here, which sort of seems to then maybe influence the way that the harmonics of the delay. I'm still not even 100% sure how that actually works or what it does, but I've just been finding just amazing sounds from this device. Of course, it's max for live, but because that's all integral now, I really feel like these devices are really part of the Live 11 package. You know, on top of that, there's 4 instruments in here, which I actually didn't realise were in there until quite late on in the sort of in the beta testing process, and not, you know, I knew they were there, but I hadn't really dived in, and I actually thought there was just I'd seen demonstrations of the tree tone. That was kind of the main one, but these devices really are nuts. I think on this Nord channel here, I've actually got a couple of them loaded up. Let's just see what's going on here. Yeah, so this top one here, this is like an FM synth. I'm going to go in for the presets here again, because designing the sounds in here. But this is, you know, you get in here, this is like a 4-operator FM synth.
Yeah.
And then there's this. Yeah, exactly. I'm not even sure how to turn that off. It doesn't turn off, it just goes. So, I mean, just starting with that, I mean, it's nuts, right?
Yeah.
Where's the other? Yeah, and again, this theme comes back again. There's like this idea of sort of gravity and mass and magnetism, and that's the vector FM. But there's also a vector grain, which you can load a sample into, and is very much like a granular synth that has a similar behavior, I guess, to what I've just shown you. You can also record audio directly into here from different sources. So the potential for what you can do, I've again really only scratched the surface. But the ability to do very similar thing with granular sounds, if it's gonna do anything, we should probably have to maybe give it some notes. Yeah. I mean, if you're familiar with granular synthesis, this kind of tiny fragments of an audio, of a piece of audio kind of chopped up and played in different directions and different speeds, it sort of does that, but again with this whole kind of layer of organic complexity. This flow field is nuts. Like, you can create, instead of having this kind of open vector space, you can create a field which has a sense of flow. So these lollipops you can change the direction of, and it sort of changes the behavior, or the movement rather, of these nodes within this field. And you can go wild. You can turn it into some crazy. The sound design potential of these devices is just absolutely mental. I mean, so that's actually 2 of them. The emit synth. Let me just drag this in. See if I can crash the machine. So the emit synth is a bit like Isotope's Iris. I don't know if you know that synth, but that basically is like a spectral synth. So you get, you have to drop a sample in. It'll be interesting, hopefully nothing too long. Yeah, let's just drag the rain stick in here. Okay, so you drag a sample in there and then it analyzes it. This is just crazy. I have to run the transport. Oh yeah, maybe we can crash the machine actually. No, there we go. So this is the kind of the waterfall diagram, if you like, of all the frequencies in this sample. And you've got this, again, these little dots that emit from your central point. But what you're selecting here is a range of frequencies over time that are going to play back according to all the other various parameters here. And you can change the just a whole range of different parameters here, including things like, where is it? Angle. So we can change the angle that these little dots fire off in, so whether they're going up and down the frequency spectrum or backwards and forwards. You can make it go bidirectional, rotate it, you can set a width. Like, it's all about these kind of little emitters, which are like playheads that sort of skim across this frequency waterfall and play stuff. And you can also do stuff like draw walls so that these nodes will bounce off them. It's arcade-tastic. And as I sort of said, with all of these designed by nature, or I forget now what it's exactly called, is it inspired by nature, there is this kind of non-repeatable element to it. So you kind of get a load of cool sounds out of it, but if you try to get back to a sound that you had, you can't really do that. It's quite difficult. I guess I'll just show you the last one because we're here. But this tree tone is like a really super organic resonator tool, and it does this thing where actually, well, let's just load up a preset to save ourselves a little bit of time. So it's building these little resonation tendrils, and the size and movement of those tendrils is changing the resonance of each of these different points. And you've got all these organic features again, like wind and speed and rain. So actually the little blips of the rain, I turn that off. I mean, really wild, bleepy stuff, right?
Actually pretty crazy. So you've got a lot of new stuff for your creativity, just to test things out and see where they lead you.
Yeah, no, completely. And actually a lot of people, I show people stuff like this, and a lot of the responses is like, but why?
Yeah.
Because they've just listened, like we've all just listened now to probably, 15 minutes of me playing a whole bunch of sounds that don't sound like immediately really useful. Obviously, depending on what you do.
Yeah.
But for me, it always comes out. I had this question really early on from people I was helping to produce techno, and I'd be doing this crazy sound design stuff, and they just look at me going, what are you doing? I just spent ages building this rack so it does some weird thing, and it's not even that. And I'm like, actually, learning to build a track is the first step in the process. And once you can build a good track, like, the structure and the basic mixing and the concept, the composition, the ideas, what is almost typically every time the next step that artists get to is, okay, I can do it, but now how do I make my sound? How do I make it so that people recognize my tracks? How do I make my tracks stand out? How do I own this material? And actually, the way to do that is to find your sound. And you're not going to find anything if you're staying in your box. You're not going to discover that. And experimenting with sound design, I think, is a process of finding your identity. And it may be that it's not even like intentionally that you're really going in to do a particular thing, but that just through the process of exploring, you find a thing that maybe nobody else has really gone in there and worked that out, and that little bit of a texture or that little kind of effect or that particular tonality that you've built is recognizable. And then you make tracks with that kind of technique embedded in, and people start to go, hey, like that sounds like a bit original, that's a different thing going on, and hey, is that Max? Do you know if that's Max's stuff? Like that. That's how that association comes. When we listen to music that's produced by the artists that we've grown to know over many years, a lot of the time we don't need to be told who made it. It's got a sound to it, and it's because they've done that exploration, they've found what it was that was their sound, and they've kind of, worked that and developed it and refined it and mastered it very much. Yeah.
So we've actually are over an hour already.
Uh-huh.
Do you have anything to talk about which really burns?
Well, I mean, there really is. We've touched the surface with some of the features from Live 11. Yeah. There are many more, but I think most of the fun stuff and indeed the stuff that I would recommend people getting inside and understand. Again, there are other packs. I mean, just briefly, there's a new pack called Drone Lab. There's one called Mood Reel. These are really insane for building soundscapes and textures. There's the new sound packs by Spitfire Audio, the brass and the strings, which just sound really nice. They're fairly simplified, you know, they're not like a full library, but they're really, really useful, really good sounding tools. Yeah, and I mean, I could go on for hours about this stuff. We went through a whole bunch of different stuff, didn't we, trying to work out what would be the most fun. We haven't really covered the macros. I guess we could look into that, but it's another 10, 15 minutes just to sort of make any sense of it. So maybe we draw a line, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe you will be our guest again.
I'm almost certain we'll do something else together, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, one thing we almost forgot. You give away a free session with you?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So
we almost forgot, completely forgot.
Maybe let's turn around again.
Yeah.
So, if you want to be in a pod, just write us a message on Instagram. You obviously should follow anyway. We are going to draw the winner tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and basically you get an hour tuition with me, which is normally delivered online with anyone who's not in the immediate area. But if you're in Leipzig and you happen to draw the lucky number, then the option to come to the studio as well, or for me to come and check out your setup, which is a lot of what I do with the artists that I work with. Just helping them get to the next level. It's less and less teaching and more just, you know, creative and technical support. But yeah, it's an hour of my time to go into whatever detail you want about any of the subjects to do with live. And yeah, I hope that somebody finds that useful.
I'm most certain. Actually, yeah.
Thanks.
I've learned a lot today. Maybe I'm getting 11.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
I've really sold it well, right? So he's maybe getting 11. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Corona thing, DJs don't get paid at the moment, so we have to see.
Yeah. No, it's fully understandable. I mean, unlike Live 10, Live 10 was a huge update because of Capture. There's lots of other things, but Capture really changed things. It's not an entirely new concept. It's existed in some forms in other places, but to have it so well integrated and this ability to just play. I don't have to think about what I'm going to do before. I can just play, and it's always listening, and everything that I can do, everything that I've done can be, or is rather, captured. And I would have just recommended that till the cows come home to anybody who actually is more of a musician than an engineer. With Live 11, it's very much like stuff on top. Like I've said, refinements is really the key. And if you're kind of still just finding your feet with Live and getting to that first stage of just being able to get to grips with it, 10 has got everything, 9 has got everything. In fact, I mean, 8 I still have on the machine. It's still got almost everything you need, you know, to make good music. It's not really, technology isn't, and the version of Live isn't really a limitation. It's more about, you know, how you use it. Like I say, 11 has definitely some really strong points, especially if you're live performing. Some of the tools there really just are insane. And if you're really into your sound design, I mean, I'd say it's almost a must. But other than that, don't sweat it, you know, ride it out. It's, there's nothing that's like a game changer, you know. Can't really say anything less unfair than that about it.
So, okay. That was actually our first webinar. The next part is probably about photography, but maybe changes later on. We will see. But until then, see you later. Stay healthy. Bye.
Take care. Thanks for coming.